Meaningful content dies with silent views. Your subscription, like, comment, and share help the video reach more people.
The unfortunate reality is Israeli planes sweeping the Syrian skies. It has also become commonplace to see the destruction of military vehicles, military sites, even civilian installations inside Syria everywhere, even of course in Damascus itself. This matter is not new. Israel has been doing this for years, and it was not the truth. The Assad regime is a friend of Israel for the Zionist entity or the Israeli entity, but they knew the end of others, that there was no war, and therefore the planes were entering Syria without the Syrian regime being exposed to them by striking the old Syrian regime, meaning the Assad regime, by hitting or bombing it. He does not respond to this inside Israel, which is why the issue means that his boldness has increased remarkably, very noticeably, as the matter has worsened in recent years during the civil war. And those inside Syria. Then it got worse after what? The collapse of the regime and the assumption of the new Syrian administration. From then on, very large encroachments occurred, reaching the destruction of 80% of the Syrian army in an arrow operation that occurred several months before, and after that there was a continuous strike in Syria, the last of which was the 3 days. On March 10th, 2025, about 40 or 50 old military sites belonging to the Syrian army were destroyed, thus preventing any opportunity to do so. There is a strong army inside Syria. What does Israel want? What do you want from this shit? You want to occupy Syria? Do you want to take Syria into the Zionist entity? Or do you want to storm Damascus, for example? The truth is, this is a remote possibility. I do not expect it, because it changes Israel's demographics to a form that it does not want. You are not the demographic, meaning there are more Arabs inside the Zionist entity than about the Jews and that. It represents a great security risk to them, especially the Arabs who are present inside Palestine. For the Jews, this is a kind of concern for Jewish analysts, and therefore he does not want to provide this percentage. He only wants to do a specific thing in his mind, and this need is to implement the Jewish doctrine of war, which is the doctrine of land in exchange for peace. So what does he do? He is trying to provide new lands to occupy other than the Golan, because the Golan has become a very important task for him. Doesn't he want to be equal to the Golan? He took Sinai to bargain with the Egyptians after that. Ali Sinai in exchange for peace. Of course, there was an advantage for Egypt in the matter, which was that it entered the 73 war and achieved victory. So it also became a mechanism of pressure on the Zionist entity. But it is here in Syria with the Golan M. It is not assumed that the old regime or the old situations are Syrian bargaining for peace in exchange for the Golan, but now. As a result of the difficult circumstances that Syria has gone through in the recent period, IS takes the Golan and remains an integral part of the Zionist entity and bargains for new lands in exchange for peace, in exchange for a state of war or a permanent truce between the two countries. What does he do? He now occupies new places, because after that the new places are what he bargained for, and at the same time he destroys. The Syrian army does not give the new Syrian regime a chance if it has pressure cards with which to put pressure on the Israeli government during the negotiations. At the same time, he also communicates with the Syrian minorities. This is a very important point. He communicates with the Syrian minorities because they always have help for me against the Syrian regime. At the same time, they are a means of exhausting the Syrian government by provoking unrest within the Syrian entity. At the same time, he is also a nail. Juha nail, what does it mean? The reason why Israel intervenes when it wants to intervene in Syria's affairs is, of course, minorities are at the forefront of them. The Alawites and Kurds are what the Jews think about and declare very clearly that we do not mean to remain silent about any kind of persecution or exposure to these sects in Syria. They threaten the new Syrian regime that if these entities who are on their words are exposed to help them, there will be a kind of Israeli exposure to Syria. Of course, dividing Syria is a distant Jewish ambition. Can they tell me if things worsen like this? What is the Syrian government doing about this situation? We see the continuous encroachments that you are doing, the aviation that is roaming Sana'a, Syria as it wants, without any kind of continuous bombing, the castles and fortresses, wall even military research centers, anything war specific or military specific. It is being bombed and destroyed. The first thing the Syrian government must do is internal unity. This is, of course, something we have spoken about very strongly before, that I must have a unified entity that includes, the entire Syrian people with all their sects and my ethnicities and the many variations in it. So that the Jews do not know how to infiltrate into this uprising through one of these minorities. And the number one, and this is more important, a part that is supposed to be resolved very quickly. There is no kind of waiting left. And the people agree on the idea of a president that all the people are standing behind him. Of course, this will be free after the elections, in which everyone is allowed to vote, and the return of displaced people leaving any of Syria to different countries of the world will be different. And of course, this is a large number, about 50–60% of the people. In this big mission, they steal number one, number two. In my opinion, it is necessary to sign a joint defense agreement with an entity. What is the situation in Syria now without an army? Almost, and without an air defense system and without aviation, it is very, very difficult for it to confront Israeli aviation and Israeli bombing. That is, building, even in its early stages, any system within the Syrian army that is along the way to meet the Zionists who struck it. And therefore it must have a common defense system. With an entity, the Arab League, there was an agreement between them called the Joint Defense Agreement. They made it in 1950, in which 9 of 12 countries participated. Then the number increased with the increase in the number of the 22 Arab League countries. But this treaty was never implemented. In its history, there has never been any use of this clause, which is the common defense between. The Arabs are all against the enemy that threatens one of the Arab countries. Therefore, the possibility of its implementation, it may be far away, because for this issue to occur, it means that all Arab countries will accept the idea of war with Israel. And this is a point that requires a very, very long study. The second entity with which you can work a joint defense agreement, someone may suggest Turkey, such as, but the truth is also, so things are clear, Turkey. You don't want to get into strained relations with the Jews? In fact, we saw a very weak reaction on the issue of the violation of the Freedom Flotilla, which was a relief flotilla directed to Gaza in 2010, and the Jews were exposed to being hit with rockets, live bullets, and gas. Wow! They beat this flotilla to death, 10 Turks, 10 Turkish activists. They wounded 56 however mean. Turkey announced, diplomatic relations were reduced to the lowest level, and I got a little angry. And then after that, Netanyahu got angry. The Turkish president wanted 2 words in 2013 through a phone call and resolved the issue. He promised to resolve the issue, even though the issue was very, very embarrassing and humiliating to Turkey, that he was exposing the Jews in this way to one of their ships. But the disease of what happened. But look at the Syrian administration. What solutions will the history of Syria have before it? By the way, it carries such a position. The history of Syria carries in the 1950s. Unity with Egypt and joint defense will dissolve the Syrian entity into unity. President Gamal Abdel Nasser became the head of the 2 countries together in one country, which is the United Republic. Was he? This talk? It was because the same threats were threats from the Baghdad alliance that it would occupy Syria and Syria. And its army was not allowed to resist this occupation. So they came to Gamal Abdel Nasser and united the countries with each other. Indeed, this issue succeeded in securing Syria from the occupation, and after that, unity collapsed but it secured Syria and got out of the situation, an experience that needs to be studied. Do you see this entity that exists now? Egypt, Saudi Arabia, or other countries? Dolt? God knows what. It is possible that Syrian political studies can determine the issue, but in the same way as the matter, we must draw attention to its importance. Developing a robust air defense system to prevent enemy aircraft from threatening the skies of Syria. Syria must also benefit from global balances. America does not live alone in the world. There are other countries in the world that achieve some balance with it. I can benefit from these relations like Russia, like China, or the other powers that can provide such aid. For the Syrian people, studying historical stations is also very important. We warn that the situation that Syria is now going through during the Crusades and during it, the Tatars, the Tatar invasion of the Islamic world. Both cases, by the way, did not survive. What Syria did not suffer from the Crusader occupation or the Tatar invasion until after it merged into a strong entity with a large Muslim entity at that time, whether it was Imad al-Din Zenki or Nur al-Din Mahmud in the Zenki period or Saladin al-Ayyubi in the Ayyubid state. Then we ask God Almighty to grant the Syrians security and safety and to grant them victory over two enemies with a strong victory, and to grant victory to Muslims in the east and west of the earth. God's reward will be good. May God's peace, mercy, and blessings be upon you.